Hello people of the internet, it's Amanda and I'm super excited for today's video because I'm here to talk about Trese, which is this new animated series on Netflix that is actually from a Filipino comic book series created by Budget Tan and Kadyo Baldissimo. Now, according to my research, the first issue of this was published in 2005. I remember this being like on the major like stalls whenever I go to like bookstores and bookshops, and I know that if you're that kind of kid like me who just has to go to like bookstores or bookshops whenever you go to the mall, you're familiar with Trese. And I don't know if it's just like my generalization, but I feel like a lot of people just know it because like even if you don't follow the series or anything like that, you would at least be aware of what Trese is. But if you're one of those people who just don't know, who clicked on this, curious about what it's about, it's basically about a girl named Alexandra Trese, and she's actually like fighting, like it's a sort of like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of thing, but here she has to deal with a lot of like supernatural creatures that is from Filipino mythology or Filipino supernatural lore. Now, as someone who's really into all of these things, like I love these types of stories as a kid, horror stories and stuff like that, it's quite curious why I never really picked up on this series, but more of just like browse through the pages of it whenever I go to like the bookstores or anything like that. But needless to say that, you know, I was aware of what Trese is, and I feel like a lot of people are also similar to me, and that's why there's a lot of excitement when Netflix announced that they're going to turn it into an animated series. When the promotion for the series started, they actually started promoting it in 3 main languages, but when I checked the settings earlier, it said that it's also dubbed in like other languages like Spanish and stuff like that, so you can also like check it out if that's more convenient for you. But the top 3 that Netflix promoted it in is 1, there's Japanese, there's English, and obviously there's a Filipino dub. Now, just to like explain to my non-Filipino viewers, we use Filipino and not Tagalog because Tagalog is like a whole different dialect, whereas Filipino is really more of like an umbrella term for the language that is a mix of like different dialects that it's sort of like influence the natural daily language that we use, especially here in Metro Manila and the adjacent cities. It's also a combination of like the other languages or lexicon or nuances that we got from the colonizers that colonized our country for so many years. So obviously there's a mix of like Spanish or American. English is quite common here in the Philippines as well as the second language. So all of that, like combine all of those things, those different dialects and rules and anything like that, and that's Filipino. So that's why we're using Filipino dub and not Tagalog dub for the intents and purposes of the conversation and as well as the Netflix setting. So yeah. Now, with that said, so it's quite interesting because for the English dub, they got Filipino/Asian descent actors and voice actors to also participate in this particular project. So that's kind of cool. And obviously, like for the Filipino dub, they got Filipino actors and voice actors to participate in it. In the role of Alexandra Trese, there's Shay Mitchell, who's from Pretty Little Liars fame, and she's part Filipino for those who don't know. And then for the Filipino dub, there's Liza Soberano, who is a Filipina actress. Now, yeah, with all that said, so as much as possible, I'll try to be as objective with my opinions about like my thoughts on the series and anything like that. But for that, let's just dive deep into what it's about, all that thing. Let's just do this. Yeah. I haven't really talked about this on my channel before, but one of my favorite Filipino film projects is actually RPG Metanoia. It aired 2010. And the idea behind it is that there's a group of kids who love playing video games, that's the name of the movie, and it sort of like covers the world that they live in, as in like the real world, and at the same time the computer world that they interact in. And I absolutely love it because the animation is really cool. There are a lot of like cultural nuances there that, you know, as a Filipino kid you just can't relate to, and at the same time like the dubbing was also really good because it's natural. It's how I hear myself speak whenever I'm speaking in Filipino. So I probably would be referencing that a lot in terms of how I analyze Trese. And yeah, probably like compare some of the elements here and there as well, considering that that one is like more than a decade ago as compared to this one. So definitely like a great contrast in my opinion. So we'll be talking about that. Now, basically the plot of it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's just about a girl named Alexandra Trese. She is a babaylan mandirigma. If you translate that, it's a priestess warrior. And her mission in life, like taking after her parents, is to bridge the gap between the supernatural and the current lives that we're living. And she sort of like protects this treaty that is between the aswangs, or the monsters or the creatures, and humanity. But there's something that threatens that the treaty, where she has to figure it out before everything goes haywire. So basically that's what the story is about. What I like about it is, so what I did was I watched the entire thing in the Filipino dub. I had English subtitles on because as much as I use Filipino on the daily basis whenever I speak, there's like deep Filipino words that they put in there that I wouldn't be able to understand if I don't have the English subs on, so I had that on. And then what I did was I watched the first episode and the last episode, both in the English version and the Japanese version, just so there's comparison. So yeah. Now, overall, I would say that one of the things that I absolutely love about this is the animation bitrate is like, I'm not particularly sure what bitrate they use, like I'm not that technical about it, but the animation bitrate of this one is definitely not like the high-speed ones that we see in other animations nowadays. And I absolutely love it, like don't get me wrong, because it definitely reminds me a lot of like 90s anime or 90s cartoons. It has that kind of like vibe to it where the movements aren't exactly as, you know, swift as it is like in film or anything like that, but I don't know, that like there's that certain rawness to it that I absolutely like in terms of visuals alone. I think that it's really well drawn. I love how they reinterpreted a lot of like the mythical creatures. Like it's not just what you imagine it to be on surface level, but I like the elements of it. Like for example, there's the Chanak. The Chanak is somewhat like a corrupted soul of a baby, and I like how they created it in a way that it's different. There's also the idea of the nuno, and they differentiated the nuno from the duende. Duende are dwarves, gnomes, and nuno, I'm not particularly sure how to explain nuno, but then like these kinds of things, like it's hard to explain it to a different audience because these are lore that is local and familiar to me as a Filipino viewer, that I just understand it just by seeing it on screen. And that's what I like about it, is even in the the subbing and the dubbing, they retain these terms. Like the babaylan mandirigma, you could have easily translated it to priestess warrior when you're explaining it in the narrative. But when I saw the English dub of it and the Japanese dub of it, they still used the word phonetically as babaylan mandirigma instead of tweaking it. So I don't know, like they retain these types of terminologies, which I actually really like. Because it retains the Filipino-ness of the entire thing, even if it's translated in different languages. I like how, again, there are a lot of like familiar creatures that was introduced, like the tikbalang, who is like a half-man, half-horse creature, and the white lady in Balete Drive, which is a pretty popular urban legend here in the Philippines. So these types of things, and there's also a lot of like social commentary happening in the plot. Now again, I didn't really follow the comics, so I don't exactly know like how much of the stories did they get from the comics, because some of the topics in the animated series feel a lot more current. a lot more updated and a lot more relatable. There's also like the MRT. One of the stations that they mentioned in the first episode is actually quite familiar to me because it's just quite near where I live. So these types of things, like these types of things that is very similar to, for example, if you watch an Japanese anime and you've been to a place, an actual place that it actually references to, it has that feeling of, oh, I know that, you know, that kind of thing. So it's pretty interesting for someone like a Filipino viewer to experience that on screen. So yeah, I absolutely love the storytelling, the way that they use, you know, the kris, which is the main weapon of Alexandra Trese. There's also Crispin and Basilio, like her two bodyguards, which is in reference to Jose Rizal's famous novels, No Limit Hangare and El Filibusterismo. Like Crispin and Basilio are famous siblings from those particular novels. Like how these things weren't exactly explained a lot or extrapolated a lot into the narrative, because it just sounds like natural and similar to how it is when we view something American or something Japanese or something Spanish or anything like that, where they throw in a lot of like cultural references, and it's up to you to look it up to know the relevance of it. It definitely feels like that, and it's kind of nice to be on that other side of the narrative for this particular context. Yeah. Another thing that I like the plot twists that happened in the plot. Like, I wouldn't say that they're 100% unpredictable, but I like how it is, like the storytelling, the recall to some of the characters and some of the major players in the storyline. Opening sequence and the ending sequence in terms of the music is also really good. One of the objective comments that I have for this particular series is in terms of, I'm not sure how the language was written in the comics, but I do feel like the Filipino dubbing is a lot like could have been a lot better in terms of phrasing things to make it sound more natural, especially since Alexandra Trese's setting is modern day. I feel like, especially for someone like her, I understand that she's more into the traditional side of things, like how she is with how she was brought up and everything like that. But for someone who looks like she's in her teens or 20s, it would have helped if she spoke a lot more like, you know, someone who is in her 20s or 30s. I like how the dialogue was for the minor characters or the supporting characters, like most of them, because they used a lot of like slang in the language. Like there's this one part where the San Telmo said, masyado ka namang killjoy or something like that. Like that kind of like natural code switching that you hear in everyday life. I feel like it could have been a lot better if Alexandra herself also speaks that way. And in some parts of the story, like when she started code switching, like for example about like cell phones or anything like that in between her sentences, it feels a lot more natural. It's just that in some parts of it, it sounds a bit more formal. So again, I'm not sure how it is, but I feel like in terms of translating the source material to screenwriting, if there's going to be a season 2, that's one of the things that I would absolutely love to see improved on. What else? I think, yeah, I absolutely, again, I feel like I love how the minor characters were delivering their lines more. So I feel like, I'm not sure if it's more of Alexandra Trese's characterization that she speaks the way she speaks or something like that. So I don't know if you know, please tell me down in the comments below. But yeah, but I think that's just one of the objective observations that I have for this, is the way that she talks. And it's not really more on like Liza Soberano as a voice actress. Initially I thought that, you know, it was her, it was the way she was delivering the lines, but it wasn't really. It was really more of like the lines that she's trying to say. So yeah, so I'm just curious about that. But again, like, I still highly suggest that you watch it in the Filipino dub, because obviously, like, it's more fun that way. That like there's just a lot about the dub in terms of slang that doesn't really get translated in the subbing, or like if it's the other language versions. So that's kind of fun. And obviously, like the way that you say the terms like tikbalang or nuno or anything like that definitely sounds a lot more natural when you use it using like the Filipino language. So that's kind of cool. Now again, I feel like in terms of dubbing, RPG Metanoia is definitely a good example. Like, I'm looking forward to a lot more Filipino projects going by this, and I feel like, again, going back to RPG Metanoia, I feel like that was on point in terms of how children are speaking like children, and the slang is pretty much like very natural as to how we speak. And I mean, as someone who grew up a lot watching Filipino dubbed anime and Filipino dubbed Korean, Japanese dramas, or even Mexican dramas, we dub it in our local language. There's a lot of potential for the Filipino voice acting community here that is being showcased, and it's shown in Trese as well. It's just that it always falls down to how natural you make it sound. Because I remember watching the Hana Noche Hare Filipino dub just recently, and I made a reaction video on that, and I loved how they localized the language, because it's not everything that you can say a certain Japanese term and translate it into Filipino language. But I feel like our voice acting community definitely does a good job in terms of localizing the content and localizing it to fit the context without necessarily like fit it in the Filipino context without necessarily losing the context or the idea behind it. So I feel like that's one aspect that definitely, like, if Trese is going to have a second season on that, could be improved on. Because yeah, I feel like as good as it is now, as enjoyable as it is now, especially if you watch in the Filipino dub, there's a lot more room to make it a lot more natural or sound a lot more like, you know, how it is like whenever we talk daily. So yeah, but other than that, I mean, this is such a huge leap, and it's super exciting. And it's actually quite interesting because I'm thinking that after watching the entire thing in the Filipino dub, then I'm going to watch it in the different dubbing. And oh, another thing, I like how the incantations, even if they're spoken in Filipino, in the subtitles, like, they still say it in Filipino, not necessarily translate it. I don't know why, but that fascinates me a lot, because it sort of like respects the idea of, you know, the rhyme or the deepness of the words that come into the incantations. So I don't know, I mean, I find it pretty cool overall. So as always, like this video, no contact, no flow at all, but I still hope that you enjoy it. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to my channel and you would want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again soon in a new one. Bye!